Okay, let's start by looking at these 16 tiles. These were samples that I did to use in classes. They were not experimentation on my part. I already knew this stuff having done a degree in ceramics, but I did these as teaching aids. So everything that I have here is purely just something that I did as a sample to show in class so that, especially for beginner students, they can get a grasp of what they can do with the clay. So just looking at the top row here, this is by far the easiest. Literally just taking anything you can find, I think this was the end of a pen or a pencil, and pressing it into the clay, see what you come up with. There's some very subtle patterns on this one, which were created by rolling or pressing a plastic bead into the clay. So just creating textures and patterns by pressing things. And I mean, kids do this from they were in kindergarten with Play-Doh. They're used to that sort of idea. Here I pressed and dragged, just repeatedly pressed and dragged into the clay, so it created a different texture there. And on this one I made a stamp, so I used bottle tops, created my initials, oops, sorry about that, created my initials with a hot glue gun. And of course letters like the J, you have to actually write it backwards because it's a stamp, and then pressed it in. And those are neat little things you can have to just imprint on the bottom of a piece of pottery or a sculpture or something. And for this one I carved into the surface of the clay, so just allowing the clay to dry to become a little bit firmer and then carving into it. So that's the start. Looking at these, I've gone a little bit further here from carving to actually piercing through the clay. Now you can use a knife to cut through certain sections. These round holes I created with a tool that I had made, which was the stem of an old umbrella. So it's kind of like a metal straw, and I was able to just push that through the clay, and because it's hollow inside, it just cuts it like a cookie cutter, nice and easily. One of the things that most people know to do with clay is to build up on the surface. So just using your hands to just add clay and build up. This tile is completely smooth, and it's made using a technique called burnishing, which is where you allow the clay to become leather hard and then rub it with something really smooth like a pebble. For this I use the back of a metal spoon, and you rub it, which compresses the surface of the clay and gives a nice smooth polished surface to the clay. Here I'm also creating raised surfaces, but in this case I did this with slip. So slip is when you water down your clay, and if you imagine somebody putting icing onto a cake, I think I actually used, this was years ago, one of those things like a hypodermic needle, without the needle of course. So I use it to just suck up the liquid clay and apply it to the surface. But you could do it literally like icing a cake, you just tie it in a bag. So that's just adding slip. There's another one here where I've done the same thing, but in this case I've used a different color clay to create that raised surface, just drawing along slip. It's called slip trailing, drawing with the slip. On this tile I've created a design with a leaf. What I actually did was pick a real leaf, put it on the clay tile, and then painted over it with the white clay. And then when it had dried, I didn't even remove the leaf, I just put it in the kiln as is, and that leaf just burnt away totally and left the imprint. So it's almost like creating this soft, subtle fossil design. And there's a similar one here where I didn't apply the other color clay. You can just about see it there. I just pressed a leaf into the wet clay, left it to dry, fired it as is, and the leaf burnt away in the firing, leaving a nice imprint. So those are all things that you can do with your clay. I'm looking at some tiles here now where I began to use other colors. So we saw this one where I added the other color slip in the slip trailing, and there's a few others here where I've also used colored clay. So the first one is really basic. I just painted this flower star shape design onto the surface of the tile with the white clay, just like you would do with paint. In this one, this is one of my favorites. It's almost like intaglio with printing design. I think it's called incising, if I've got that correct. I haven't done ceramics much in years. Well, I do actually teach it, so I should know that, but I think it's called incising. Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. But basically I've got the red tile, terracotta tile. I've applied the white colored slip on top, and then when it was a little bit dry, I used a sharp tool to then carve back through the white clay until I could see the red clay underneath. And that's a very old technique. It's been used since Roman and Greek times with their pottery. This is a similar technique, but instead of just applying the white clay on top, in this case you actually carve out the design first. So you create a little line or channel, paint the other clay on top, in this case the white clay, onto the red terracotta clay, and then when it's all dry, the entire surface is scraped flat. So you get one smooth flat surface, but the white clay is left in the grooves. Okay, so there's some ideas there about adding other colors to your clay. And this is just with using other types of clay, not adding in any oxides or glazes or anything yet. This is just what we can do with clay itself. Alright, so those are some tiles. I'm also going to show you some other methods of creating imprints and textures in your clay.